Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the only always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor while his wife cuts onions in the back. You won't cry, but you might hear some chopping noises. So today I'm going to be reviewing an album by Patricia Taxxon called Schwarz, or Schwarz, I suppose you pronounce it in German. And it's funny because if you watch my channel, you would probably assume that the artist that I've reviewed the most is Kanye West, or Bob Dylan, or someone like that. But actually, Patricia Taxxon is the person I have reviewed the most. And there's a very good reason for that. The weird thing is, the last time I reviewed anything or talked about her at all was about 6 months ago. And at that point, I had 2,600 less subscribers. So my channel has blown up, and it's been funny because in the early days, the only videos that had any success were videos where I reviewed her music, because she has a very small, not actually very small, but a very dedicated fan group, and a small number of that fan group would watch my videos and talk about it because they were happy that she was being taken seriously. So it's interesting because in a real way, Patricia Taxxon is the origin of this channel, and I'll explain that. About 5 years ago, I met a kid who is now a very good friend of mine, and he's, when I met him, he was like 12 years old. He was the son of my ex-girlfriend, and I took him very seriously immediately because I recognized he was very intelligent and very smart. And if you're a smart adult, you learn that young people know a lot more than you do. And he would talk to me all the time about YouTube and about Bandcamp and about how things worked. And I listened to his advice, and I took his advice all the time. And the one musician he always talked about was Taxon. Now, this is in a previous time when Patricia Taxxon had a dead name, which I'm not going to mention out of respect. But Taxon was it. And for my friend, this was the greatest musician. And so I realized as I started making videos and starting my YouTube experiment that I'd want to cover Taxon. But the thing is that the way Patricia Taxxon makes and releases music is completely of this moment, to the point where as a Xer, as an old man, I almost don't even understand it. And so the quest to understand Patricia Taxxon's music and the way that she distributes it is equally important. It is essentially the new underground. It is artist as content maker. Now I say that, and I imagine some of you are getting insulted. Content is a very rough kind of capitalist term that's used to describe internet commerce, right? This video is content that I am making to benefit the Google corporation, right? Netflix is content. But the way that she releases music is she releases music basically once a month, a full album once a month. She makes music in, as she says, different moods for different times of your life. And it's almost like blog music in a way, where you feel, or like a YouTube channel music, where you feel like what she's sharing with you isn't the old method of a perfect object that has been worked on for years and years and years and presented to you, but something in a rough state, a state of completion, but a rough state of polish, I would say. And so what I did was last year, and you can watch the videos, I reviewed every album she came out with, all 13, I think it was. And then at the end of the year, I did a sort of greatest hits. I called it the Taxonomy. There's a link up there if you want to watch it. And my suspicion was proven out, which is that if Patricia Taxxon decided to release a classic album, which is to say an hour's worth of music and just the best stuff from each year, it would be as good as any other album that I reviewed. But that's me thinking like Mr. Oldman. I even offered to help produce one of her albums on vinyl because I want a physical copy, because I'm Mr. Oldman. I'm not Gary Oldman, great actor and weird fascist. Sorry, my wife kind of laughed at that. You can laugh at my jokes. It's endearing. So is the chop. By the way, can you tell me in the comments if you like the sound of chopping onions? I think it's quite nice. It's pleasing. She's making pizza later with caramelized onions and anchovies. What I realized was that the way that she makes this music and that she releases it, in my old man way, I was trying to turn it into something I can understand. And that's actually less interesting. It's more interesting the way that she releases music. She doesn't copyright anything. She doesn't have any control over her music. She tells anybody, just give me credit and you can put it anywhere. And that's why, if you're like me and you watch a lot of YouTube, especially YouTube dedicated to video games or YouTube dedicated to far leftist political philosophy in the group generally known as BreadTube, which is another thing that my friend introduced me to, thanks Gabe, you hear her music all the time, to the point where she is almost the unofficial soundtrack of leftist gaming. And if you're like me, and you told me 5 years ago, hey Skye, there's going to be an unofficial soundtrack to leftist video game YouTube channels, I would assume that that meant nothing and had no importance. That's wrong. It is very important. The left-wing YouTube community in video gaming is extremely important. And this artist, who maybe, if you're one of those 2,600 people who's joined me since January, is someone you don't know. So let Gary Oldman Skye teach you about Patricia Taxxon in case you don't know. Her music is very personal, but at the same time, it's often instrumental. And when it's instrumental, it alternates between something very ambient, lots of sort of arpeggiators and like waves of sounds, and music which would best be described as kind of video game style music. Very kind of chirpy and chippy and very video game inspired. As I said, she is ridiculously prolific. And at the end of last year, I was suffering from what I called Taxon fatigue, which is, I feel bad about because there are a handful of viewers who like watching my Taxon videos. But like, after doing all 13 albums in 1 year and doing the greatest stuff, I just needed a break. So she thankfully released like, I think 3 albums that were all basically instrumental, very ambient, very kind of sounding to me, Gary Oldman Skye. So I was able to just sort of say, okay, I'm just going to take a little break. And then she released an album last week, and I was like, oh, sweet. She released 1 album. And it's a nice mixture of the singing stuff that I like and the instrumental stuff that I like. It's very approachable. I am ready to review her 1 album last week. And then do you know what Patricia Taxxon did? She released a 2nd album the next day. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to take a break. I'm going to have to listen to both of them and then review them in addition to the other 3 albums that I missed. And then you know what she did the next day? She released a 3rd part. She released 3 albums in 3 days. So, I often say it, the skill of the 21st century is not discovery. Discovery is no longer important. Everything is there. The skill of the 21st century is discernment. What information is true, what information is false, what information is tainted by someone's perspective, what information is as neutral as possible, etc. My job for myself was, how do I approach Patricia Taxxon's music after skipping 6 months of her output? How do I do it? How do I look at these 6 albums and try to synthesize them? And so I simplified it. I'm just doing 1. I am just doing the last album, Schwarz, black. I think that's, how would you pronounce Schwarz in German? Like that? Yeah, Schwarz. She isn't German, but she knows too many Germans. So I'm just going to go through that, and at times I will touch on it. It's part of what she calls in German a 3-part ballet, and each part of this starts off, and each has a different color. So there's Geld, which is gold, and Rosa, which is pink, and then Schwarz, which is black. Each of these follows thematically, sort of with the feelings you might feel go with each color, and I found Schwarz to be the most interesting. It starts off with a kind of distorted keyboard sound that actually made my dogs bark this morning while I was making pancakes. My wife, Dr. Mrs. Payne, she was like, what is that sound? And the dogs were barking. But then actually it transitions. And one thing that Patricia Taxxon does very well is her songs have a lot of movement. And they start one place and they end in another. And then we get to the track Escape, and that's where I started to realize this is one of her better albums. Has kind of plucky synth chords, but then some like warbled sounds come in, and everything gets a little bit off and a little bit warbly. And then drums come in, and it's very satisfying. And the nice thing is, Patricia Taxxon doesn't copyright protect any of her music, so I can just play you as much of it as I like. Thank you, Patricia Taxxon. I don't have to worry about the copyright goblins. God, I wish I were a big enough YouTuber to have people do drawings of the copyright goblins. Oh well, I'll get there soon. So I'm going to play you a little bit of a couple of the tracks on here, including Escape. And so we're going to hear some of this off of the album Schwarz by Patricia Taxxon. Oops, sorry. So this is a good example of her kind of trancey ambient sounds, a little bit more on the upbeat side. I'm going to sound a bit forward to where the drums come in. And a lot of this album feels like, you know, you just kind of nod your head. I could imagine driving around listening to this album. I happen to know that she lives in Santa Cruz. I used to drive through Santa Cruz a lot when I lived in Santa Barbara. And I could feel it. You know, I could feel driving down the 101, listening to this music. Right? And then moves on to track number 3, which is Something Pretty. An interesting thing about Patricia Taxxon is her usage of voice. Her voice is used sometimes. Sometimes she uses guest vocalists. Sometimes she uses a lot of vocoder to cover up her own voice. And sometimes she uses vocoder to alter other people's voices. In this case, in Something Pretty, it's a vocoder for somebody else's voice. And it's somewhat affected, but I think it's it's a very pleasant song here. Here's Something Pretty.
I look to the sky, or rather the canopy we live beneath tonight. Parallel seas
And if this is interesting to you, which I hope it is, there's some trademarks of her style here. Melodies that are very extended, that go over a long space, fairly complicated. And then her lyricism is very much, in this song, she says repeatedly, something, 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 or rather, in which she recontextualizes what she previously said. I look to the sky, or rather the canopy we live beneath tonight. Let's see. I trembled in fear, or rather excitement for what is to come. That is at the heart of her lyricism and what makes her a good lyricist. And maybe what I don't like about her lyrics as well. It's very witty and smart, and I like that. And the way that it's witty and smart is in saying something and then making you question what she just said. And at times, I find it overworked. I find it a little bit too, maybe precious is the word, or just a little bit too overworked. Each of these verses ends with the term, a black soliloquy. However you feel about something that ends with a black soliloquy, I think is fine. I think that's an okay line, but that's a little bit far. I feel like the strength, but when I'm awake, or rather, my parable is walking again. So it's maybe a little bit too much, but that's also part of the charm. There is very much a nerdy charm to Patricia Taxxon's music. And I say that as somebody who tries to be a charming nerd. Next track, Moons, very light and atmospheric again. The kind of instrumental music that she's so good at making, where you can just listen to it and imagine yourself driving and just being somewhere, well developed, and it keeps, as it goes, she keeps adding new elements to it, to where you really feel the movement between the songs. And then we get to Ghost Note Groove. It's my dream so Patricia Taxxon, I really enjoy what she does with rhythms. So, when you're sitting in front of a computer and you're making music, as she does, I assume, she's with a full orchestra doing all this, it's intoxicating, the amount of freedom that you have to play with rhythm. But she plays with rhythm so well, and I don't always feel like she gives herself the full permission just to go for rhythm, just to abandon melody and just go for rhythm. I'm thinking that would be great if we could have an album by her that's just rhythm on top of rhythm on top of rhythm. So this track here, Ghost Note Groove, is funny because it has her playful side too, where she's sampling a drum teacher, I believe on YouTube, explaining how to use ghost notes, which is a thing in drumming, which if my son were here, he could explain it to you. But you just hear how all these rhythms go together and the talent that she has for mixing all these rhythms together in an interesting way. It's I'm going to fast forward here.
So up to there, 1 beat and 2, and that beat 2, you can hear that snare drum. It's got to be a contrast to that ghost note. Quiet, loud. Make sure you get that.
So the feeling of being kind of constantly under the water and just unsettled, but rhythmically strong. And earlier in the song, you hear that as well. Very complicated, interesting grooves with rhythms which at times are too complicated, but I think just right for the effect that she's going for, which I think is this kind of unsettling groove. That's the word I'd settle on. Okay, good. I really enjoy that track. The next track is Paper Planes, the MIA song. Do we pronounce that Mia? I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce anything. I'm a dad. Dennis Rodman, as my father would say. But this is cool because of the 3 albums, I'm not going to talk that much about Rosa and Geld, but of the 3, each one contains a cover right in the middle. And I've never known her to do covers before. So the first one she does is Duke of Earl. Duke? Whatever it is. The Stevie Wonder song about Duke Ellington. And that's fine. And the next one is What a Wonderful World. But this one is Paper Planes, and it's just delightful. All 3 of them are very interesting because she takes the songs but deconstructs them in a way and sings them, but with a vocoder so heavily that she completely transforms them. And the question is always, how do you do a good cover? Right? How do you do a good cover? You have to do a good cover by making it different in a meaningful way, making it yours. And she's able to do that very effectively. So if you remember Paper Planes, you can hear it in here, but she has just Taxoned it up. She's just made it her style with the video game sounds and the keyboard sounds and the vocoder altering the voice. And then when we get to the trademark chorus, it's going to be even better. Just one second here. I turned off the air conditioning. I'm hot. Frankly, again, I think she could do an entire album of covers like this, and it would be a super big hit. I think she resists doing the easy thing that works every time. I think that's part of why I like following her career so much, is that she seems to do things, like she did an entire album of kind of psychotic covers and mixing things together, and it worked out super well, and then she just did something totally different. But it would be fun to see. I guess I'm making requests. I'd like to see an album all rhythms and an album of all covers like this, because it's a very enjoyable way to hear covers. It's almost like in meme culture or something where people do something but by somebody else. You know, they try to reimagine a popular piece of art done in someone else's style. I think that she could do an album of all Taxon covers, and it'd be quite good. That's followed up by a song called Chorus, which is ambient and slow, nicely done. Then Out of Space, which is somehow, and I don't know how she did this, it is at the same time ambient and dubstep. How do you do that? How do you ambient and dubstep at the same time? I don't know, but that's the excitement about Patricia Taxxon, why I enjoy reviewing her music so much. She's pretty capable of doing those sorts of things, which I imagine other music critics might listen to this with a less favorable ear and not be able to hear that kind of surprising thing that she's able to do. But it really is quite interesting. Next track, Fly, another kind of soaring ambient song. Then it gets like this. I'm going to go to the 5-minute point here. Where you can kind of hear her singing, because this is the final track on the album. And just to give you a sense of what it sounds like, kind of a lot of these elements all combine on this one track, Fly. So you have the ambient sounds there, the kind of soft wave sounds, and then her voice in. Do you smell the onions? She started cooking them. They smell great. So that's Schwarz. A great album. Probably one of my favorites that she's done. I can't figure out even how to buy it on on Bandcamp. I'll buy it later. She's only on Bandcamp, by the way, not on that. I will play you a couple other tracks from the other things that she released last week, just for fun, because there's no track on Schwarz which represents her style of singing, like just her singing without vocoder. So for that, we'll go to the track Alien off of Geld. This is a really good track as well. So this is her more typical, if you go to her back catalog, you hear a lot more singing like this, in this kind of charmingly nerdy voice that she often sings in, with these sort of very well-chosen words that at times are maybe a little bit overworked. So that's a good example, Alien off of Geld or Gelb. It's Gelb, G-E-L-B. I assume that means gold, I don't know. Ich spreche kein Deutsch. Okay, so there you go. There's my review of the last 6 months of Patricia Taxxon. I'm going to keep reviewing her, maybe not everything that she comes out with, but definitely keep on checking in and paying attention, because this is the whole idea behind the channel. Yes, part of it is that it's a way for me to like make sure that I listen to the new Bob Dylan album, and it's a way for me to discover new hip-hop and all that kind of stuff. But it's also keeping an eye towards the fact that everything is changing. And the media, the medium, the style, the delivery, everything is changing. And I am just barely able to understand it at all. Like, I am barely aware of these changes. But whenever I'm aware of them, I'm going to share them with you. So, if you want to know the future of underground music, Patricia Taxxon, there it is. You're welcome. Okay, well, for Tilly and Gabe, there's the camera.